Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to my presentation. My name is Nicole and I am a visual designer and illustrator based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And today I wanted to talk to you about getting started with Cinema 4D. So just to give you some context, I started using Cinema and really practicing 3D about less than a year ago. And within that short amount of time, I've been able to go from basically not knowing anything about the program and 3D to using it kind of here and there in my personal work to actually using it in my day-to-day full-time job and my work professionally. And so I think because of that, I'm still pretty connected to the process of being a beginner, but also being able to have specific findings in terms of things that were successful for me in the learning process that helped to not only accelerate my learning, but more importantly to make it just a lot more enjoyable of a process in general. And so whether you are learning 3D or you're wanting to start with Cinema 4D or you're just wanting to learn a new skill in general, hopefully some of these tips and insights can be helpful for you in that process. So we will go ahead and get into it. So what I'll be talking about today, I'll talk a little more about who I am, my background, give you some previews of my work, and talk about how I apply 3D. And then I'll actually talk about how I got started in Cinema 4D, that learning process like I mentioned, and those step-by-step like insights and actionable findings that really helped me in that process. For that one, I'll actually show you a few specific projects that utilize really key tools within Cinema that have helped me take my work very, very far. So I think those tools will be very beginner friendly, and they'll be definitely things that will be helpful for you to master if you're just starting out. So currently I work at a company called RepairPal, and RepairPal is an online marketplace for car repair shops in the United States, and I work there as a visual designer. And so as a visual designer, I'm responsible for a lot of different design type of things. So everything from product design and website design, as you can kind of see here on the left-hand side, to all of our branding and creative direction, being that I'm really the only designer on staff, and so I have a lot of creative freedom when it comes to different decisions like that. But more so as relevant to this presentation, I also do all of the 3D assets for our company and the 3D illustrations. And so this was very much something that I wanted to bring to the role because it was an interest of mine, and I kind of gradually over time figured out different ways to infuse more 3D into the different projects that I was doing or the different visuals I was putting together, and just figure out different ways to actually exercise that interest of mine in my day-to-day work. Some of which include like this project here, which was a series of illustrations that I did for some emails that we send out to customers who book through our website, as well as the shops who are connected to our company. So these visuals just kind of illustrate like the customer journey through the 3D graphics. And so I think this was just a really fun project to be able to try out putting together different scenes, as well as getting a lot of experience and practice 3D modeling cars, which was definitely a challenge at first, but just a really fun project to apply 3D to. I also do a lot of little miscellaneous graphics here and there, like for the employee experience overall, which is another interest of mine. But this graphic in particular was a design that I put together for a slide deck, and I wanted to include this example just because I thought it was a really unique application of 3D, in that most of the things within this graphic were made in Cinema 4D. And so it kind of is just an interesting example of pushing the boundaries of like 2D and 3D, which I personally really enjoy, and you get a really unique result at the end of it. And kind of my largest project to date is just creating a lot of different assets and illustrations for our brand and identity. And so that includes a lot of like car and car repair shop types of graphics. It also includes a lot of like mechanic type of graphics, but generally like a lot of different objects that I enjoy combining 2D and 3D for. And so I think that provides me personally a lot of practice with 3D modeling, which I really enjoy, but it's also just a really interesting way to like apply 3D in a design context, which I also really enjoy. And so that's a little bit about my work currently, but I also wanted to talk a little about my work before I actually got into 3D, so you can start to understand how I actually took up that interest. And so prior to where I work currently, I worked a lot in the public sector, and so my last role was working at a local government slash environmental agency slash sanitation agency. And so it was a lot of design around topics like wastewater and sewer systems and environmental education and all of these really interesting niches within like public service. And so as you can kind of see here, my work is really focused on like character illustration, a lot of like very fun and playful type of style choices, and just a lot of print work in general. And kind of maybe on more the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of style, this was another project that I worked on, which was a publication that was sent out to all the residents, and it was half annual report and half calendar. And so for this specific project, I did everything from the editorial design and layout design to the information graphics to even all the photography that you see here, which was another past interest of mine. But generally, the reason why I kind of wanted to talk about all this was so that you can kind of see that my like palette of skills is very eclectic and it's very diverse. And while some might call me a generalist, I just really enjoy like indulging in all the different mediums that there are. And so that was really what drew me to 3D as a medium. And that was really why I wanted to start learning 3D. I just really saw it as like this beautiful convergence between all these different artistic disciplines. You know, you have the design aspect where you're choosing colors and you're, you know, creating compositions and, you know, creating balance and hierarchy and stuff like that. And then you have the illustration aspect where you're taking shapes and forms and actually putting them together to make something pictorial. You have the photography aspect where you are lighting scenes and you're, you know, using cameras and playing with focal lengths, and even if you want to get into animation, like there's the cinematography aspect of it as well. And so I really saw it as like, again, this convergence of all these different mediums that I had experience in and really loved, and that was why 3D really seemed like the natural next step for me creatively to try out something that would really push myself. And so even though that was kind of the way that I saw things and the next step that I wanted to make, it was actually a much longer process of like really working up the courage to try out this new medium that was just so intimidating and so overwhelming at first. It took me a long time between installing a trial version of Cinema 4D to actually starting to use it regularly to actually getting to the point where I felt comfortable in it. And so I wanted to share with you some of those specific like tips that helped make the process just a lot more approachable in general, and just helped me to acclimate a lot faster to this new and very foreign medium that I was exploring. So the first tip that I would really say is to find your interest and pursue it. And so when you think about 3D, it is such a huge field in terms of the possible applications of things you could do with it, right? You could go into advertising and you could do that, or you could go into video games and make characters or scenes, or you could even go into film and animation and, you know, do that. And even outside of those three huge industries, there are so many other things that you could possibly do with 3D. And if you kind of just take a step back and, you know, think, what would I possibly apply this skill for, and you know, what is like the value long term of me learning a skill? If you see all those possible outcomes, it's exciting, but it's also very overwhelming. And so what I personally found helpful was to find specific artists and individuals in the field whose work I really resonated with, just because I could use them as role models, and really just use their careers as inspiration for what I could possibly do with this skill. And so some of those specific individuals are listed here. So first we have John Braxton, who is a 3D artist, and he specializes a lot in like film and animation, particularly a lot of a lot of his work kind of hinges on social commentary and even satire in some way. And for me, having interest also in like activism and public service and that whole realm, it was really fascinating just to see 3D applied in that context by an artist. And so I think 3D definitely also is just the perfect medium for it because there's so much you can do with it. And his work really, really illustrates that very well. And on the right here we have Aaron Martinez, who is a 2D and 3D illustrator. And seeing his background and how he incorporates both of those aspects of 2D and 3D for me is also very inspiring, just because it's something that I can definitely relate to in terms of having that kind of skill set and background. And it's just really exciting to see how that impacts his work, from the style choices and the proportions and, you know, even just like the colors and textures and lighting. It's all very reminiscent of like a design aesthetic. And so I really found that inspiring for myself, given my background. And lastly, we have Paul McMahon of The Rusted Pixel, who I came across his work fairly early in my time of learning 3D, and I think it definitely influenced me very heavily in terms of wanting to take 3D modeling in and of itself much more seriously, just because I was totally blown away to see what was possible by using the different modeling tools within Cinema 4D, given his work. And that's definitely why I think now I have such a deep interest in 3D modeling and learning how to do it really well. My main takeaway with all of this is to, again, find people who you can kind of hold as role models in the industry, or just, you know, you can look at their work and really see the possibilities that are possible through this medium and through this, this skill. I think that's really something that helps you kind of motivate you to take that first step into learning. And so my second tip is to seek out the right resources. So 3D, like a lot of these neo-tech design disciplines, it's very focused on self-education for one, but also online learning. And so for Cinema 4D in specific, a lot of it focuses on learning through tutorials. And so if you go to YouTube and search up Cinema 4D tutorial, you're going to have a lot of different results. And so even this in and of itself is like very overwhelming to me, to see all these different results. And it can make the learning process seem a lot more difficult than it has to be. And so for me, it was overcoming this was doing something as simple as just implementing a system like a spreadsheet. So this is the specific spreadsheet that I used for a long time when I was getting started. And you can kind of just see here how everything is organized. It's very clear in terms of what the video is about, from the title to who made it to even what kind of category it falls under. I think the category section is really key, just because with 3D there's so many different areas you could focus on, and to be able to categorize the tutorials, whether this focuses on rendering or UV mapping or lighting or texturing or whatever it is, that can make it a lot easier for you to seek out exactly what you're looking for. And for me, of course, it was like a topical overview, so I kind of just included everything here. So I think one of the most important things about this is that you allocate your mental stamina towards learning a lot more efficiently. So for example, when I was first learning 3D, I had like, you know, a few hours each day that I would devote to actually learning something. And so rather than starting off those hours by going to YouTube and searching frantically, okay, what should I learn today? I could just go straight to my spreadsheet, watch the next tutorial in the queue, practice that a few times, maybe repeat that, and that's a really good substantial amount of practice. And I've spent all of that mental energy on actually learning and practicing, as opposed to just trying to find something and, you know, getting frustrated or getting overwhelmed or watching stuff that isn't relevant to me at that given moment. So I think just being a little bit more organized about it really goes a long way in helping to set up a really sustainable process. And my third point is to manage your learning workflow. So to illustrate this, let's say that you are taking a class and you show up for class on the first day and you're really excited to get started, and what kind of happens? Your professor hands you a syllabus. And on the syllabus, it outlines everything you can expect to experience that term, from the projects you're going to be doing to the deadlines to even like the specific learning units. It's all very clear and it's all very outlined. And I think the main benefit of this is it helps to eliminate any type of uncertainty and mystery around the curriculum. And so whatever you can really do or implement along those lines for your own learning curriculum, that will go a really long way in making it a lot easier for you. And so for me, this was doing something as simple as just having a Kanban board. So this is my Kanban board that I used for a long time, and you can kind of see here it's divided into 3 columns. So the first column is all the stuff to do. So whether this is projects that I wanted to do or ideas that I had or topics that I wanted to look more into, this column really served as like an idea incubator. So whenever I wanted to pick up something new, I could just visit this column and go from there. The middle column here is all the stuff that's in progress. So I think especially if you are learning a new skill outside of your day job, or if you only have like a very limited amount of time to devote to learning, this column can be really key because it helps you keep track of exactly where you left off last time. So especially, if you want to start a personal project, for example, and a lot of time elapses from the time that you started a project, this can be helpful for you to just pick up exactly where you left off. And so the last column here is the done column. And this is my personal favorite column just because you get to see all of the amazing stuff that you've actually accomplished while learning. And I think especially when, learning is such an abstract and very conceptual and intangible process. And so anything you can really do to make it more tangible and just more tactile in general, that's going to be doing you a huge service in terms of motivating you to keep going and actually helping you feel like you are making progress and moving forward with this skill. And I think especially, in a discipline like this that's very artistic and very creative, it's whatever you can do to help reinforce that creative confidence within yourself. That's going to be, helping you in the long run as well. And so to be able to just browse all the amazing work that you've done, that you're personally really proud of, that can go a long way in just reinforcing that confidence as an artist and as a creative person. And so my last point is to take on personal projects and just practice a lot. So whether that is daily challenges, for example, or collaborations with other people, or even just, things that you're personally interested in, whatever it is that you can do to practice your skills, that's what's going to be really key here. And so I wanted to show you some specific projects that I had done that, again, utilize some really good tools within cinema that will help to take you and your work very far, especially if you're a beginner. So this was one of my first projects that I ever did within the program. It was this toilet. And I just remember being so frustrated because I spent, for one, so much time to make this, and then at the end of it I was just so appalled at how bad it looked, and what was worse is that I didn't even know how to make it look better, right? And so what I actually wanted to show you was some of those specific modeling techniques that I used to get it from looking like this like this like reality version to more of like this expectations version, we'll go ahead and jump into cinema and do that. So here we have our toilet, and you can kind of just see how that looks with it being in Cinema 4D. And so for this exact project, I can show you how I made the bowl. And so the bowl utilizes a lot of modeling techniques that I pretty much used to make the whole thing. So I thought the bowl might be a good representation of how to do that. And typically when it comes to modeling, I will go off of a real life photograph or something like that, just to make sure that I'm getting the details and like the proportions right. But for this, I think this toilet serves that example pretty well. So we'll just go off of that. So to start off, we want to start with a primitive object, and then we want to actually kind of manipulate the geometry a bit more to get it to look how we want it to. So to do that, we can start off up here with our primitive objects, and we can just go to adding a cylinder, And then from there, you can just kind of resize the cylinder using these controls here, just to get it to roughly the size that we're looking for in terms of the toilet bowl. And so when you have it roughly that size, I'm just gonna turn on my garage shading lines again. When you have it roughly that size, you want to do something, which is add a few more height segments, and you'll see why we want to do that in a bit, but I think about 8 or so should be good. And then from here we can pretty much just go into edit mode. And so to do that, you just want to go up here and hit this make editable control, or you can hit C on your keyboard, and then this little icon here will change to this polygon object icon, and that means we can actually edit the geometry and really play with it a lot more freeform. So for now, we just want to again go back into our scale tool, so you can hit T on the keyboard, and we just want to make it a little bit skinnier that way. And you can kind of see here on the toilet, it is a little bit skinnier width-wise than it is lengthwise, so just kind of making it look like that. And so now that we kind of have our cylinder pretty much the same size as what we want it to be, we have an issue where this is all straight, whereas the actual toilet itself is curved. And so in order to get that really nice curve, we're going to be using a few tools that I pretty much do most of my 3D modeling with, and that is the loop selection tool and edge mode to start with. So we'll go over here and go into edge mode, and then you can actually see, if you hover over your object, you can see all of the lines that you can select. And so we want to actually select all the lines along the circumference of this cylinder. And so to do that, we're just going to hit UL on the keyboard to go into our loop selection. And so now we can actually highlight the edges along the circumference of that cylinder and actually manipulate it like that. So if we just go to, let's say we want to select this one and this one, and we hold shift to select both of those, and then we can just hit T for scale and then just scale those down a bit more, and you can actually see the geometry being manipulated like that. And so hitting UL again, we can select this middle section here, hitting T, and then we can just scale it down even further than we did those last two. And now you can already see we're starting to get that nice curve in here that we were looking for. And so for this top section of the bowl here, we just want to do the same exact thing but in the opposite way, so that it kind of curves outwards like that. So we just want to hit UL again. We can select, let's say, these two, or maybe we'll select these two, scale it out a bit more, and then hit UL again, select the middle two, and then just scale it out even further than those two. And now you can see we have that really nice curve just like that. And all we really needed to do that was just start with the cylinder, manipulate the geometry a bit, and then you get the result that you're looking for. And now I wanted to introduce another tool, which is the ring selection or loop cut tool. And so if you look at the toilet here, we have like this, the inside of the bowl, right? And so in order to do that, we want to kind of carve out some space on the top here. And there's a few different ways we could do this, right? So we could go into our polygon mode and then just kind of like, you know, going to the select tool, we could select all the faces on here and just hit delete, but then you kind of get this interesting and not quite ideal look where all the polygons here are very flat, right? Whereas for the actual model, we need kind of like a lip and some more geometry there. So we don't quite want to do that approach, but we can instead go in with the loop cut tool. So to do that, you just want to hit ML on your keyboard, and then you can actually see when you hover over this face here how you can cut it in a circle like that along all the polygons. And so if we just kind of, you know, eyeball it where we might want that cut to be and then cut as such, we can go back into the selection tool and actually just select these inner polygons here. And then we're kind of the first step there. And then so from here, we want to just go into a different tool, which is the extrude tool. So the extrude tool is really powerful because it allows you to like simultaneously create and mold geometry at the same time. And so for this, we just want to, again, using your extrude tool, we just want to kind of like drag down, and you'll see the axes kind of moving, but you're not really seeing it visually, and that's because we have to actually go in and delete this geometry up here. And so now you can actually see how we extruded that face down that we had cut. And so now we kind of have that indentation that we were looking for. But if you want to get even a bit more detailed, and if you look at the model a little bit more closely, you'll see that the bowl on the inside is kind of curved accordingly. And on top of that, the hole at the bottom is quite a bit smaller than the hole at the top. And so to do that, we just want to do a few things. First, we can start with making that bottom face there smaller. So we can just hit UL again for loop selection and select that entire face. And then hitting T, we can just scale it down all the way like that. And so now we have like kind of like this bowl looking thing. And so if we wanted to kind of make this curve a little bit more gradated in that way, we can just again go back to our loop cut tool, hitting M, and just insert a few cuts in the inside as such. And that'll help make the curve a bit softer in that way. We can even go back to edge mode and hit UL for loop selection, and then we can even just scale down these loops accordingly to make it a bit more kind of bowl shaped in that way. And one of the last things that I'll show you is, for this toilet at least, is how to kind of, if you look really closely in this toilet here, you can see that the back of it, the hole kind of goes back, and that goes into the tank, supposedly. And so we just want to kind of do the same thing where we can select that face again, just hit E for the move tool, and then you can just like move this back like that. And that makes it really easy to give that appearance. And so I think with these set of tools alone, the loop selection tool, the loop cut or ring cut tool, and extrude, those are, I think they make up honestly most of the things that you'll need to do. And so you can get a lot done with them, as illustrated by this toilet example. So one other thing that I wanted to show you for this specific project is, if you remember in the original graphic, there's like this swirling turd inside the toilet. And I wanted to just show you how to do that as well, because it is very simple, and it utilizes a few different techniques than we just did. So looking at the turd a bit more closely, there's actually a really handy tool within Cinema 4D to make something that looks like this, and that is the helix. And so if we just go up here and go to helix, you won't see anything at first, but that's because it's very big. So let's just scroll out. You can kind of see that loop appearance that we really want. So if we just kind of rotate this using R and then scale it down using T, we can get it in view much more easily, so we can actually manipulate it. So what we want to do for this is to utilize a lot of the object properties to actually manipulate it before we add a bit more detail. And so for that, we just want to kind of lower the start radius to get it to be a bit more narrow at the top, and then keeping the bottom very big as well. And then from there, we kind of have something that looks like what we're going for. You could even mess with the height a little bit, mess with the height bias, kind of how the height is distributed along that length of it. There's just a lot you can do here, so you can definitely play around with it to get the look that you're going for. But now that we have kind of the structure of the poop, we actually want it to have some body. And so to do that, we're just going to go to, we're going to actually apply a sweep to it. So to do that, we just want to go into this menu and select sweep. And a sweep is a really useful tool because it allows you to kind of give form to vectors, or splines as it's called in cinema. And so what we want to do essentially is we want to follow a very specific formula for a sweep. So that involves making our spline a child of the sweep, and then it involves putting something else under the sweep, which is a circle right over here. And so if we put that in between, you'll see that something has happened, and if you zoom out, you'll see it really looks very strange right now. And that's just because the actual radius of the circle is way too big. So we want to just, shrink it down a bit. And then where you start to see it actually looks like what we're going for here. So from here, it's just a lot of, fine tuning, kind of playing with it, seeing what works. Again, you can go back to the helix object properties and mess with it there. But that's pretty much how you get the look of the poop that we're going for. And so one of the last things that I wanted to show you is that you can actually even mess with the caps of the sweep here if you want to manipulate that to have a different look. You can just navigate into the sweep and then just really play around with the size here. And just, there's even different types of shapes you could put on here, There's the step feature, which is interesting as well. Just a lot of fun different things you could do to give different looks to it. So those tools really are able to help you accomplish a lot of different things within Cinema. And for the next project, I actually wanted to build off of some of those tools that I just talked about. And so this project that I did specifically was based off of a series of 2D illustrations that I had done on different characters. And I thought it would be a really great challenge to try to take some of these 2D characters and make them into 3D. And so for this specific one, I did this little space cadet, which actually utilizes a lot of very basic modeling techniques. So we'll go back into Cinema and I'll show you what that looks like. For this one, because we have an actual reference image, it's helpful to just go in and import that image directly so you can reference it. The way that I personally like to do this is by going into a different view. So you just hit your middle mouse button to go into the 4-up view, and then you can hit again middle mouse button into this lower view here. And in this way, I find this view very helpful for doing any type of spline modeling, basically. So to get this reference image in here, you just want to hit Shift V on your keyboard to open the viewport settings, and then you can actually add in the image based in this line here. You can even play with the transparency, just really make it easy for you to not have to leave Cinema or reference all these other things elsewhere. So for this, we're going to use a technique called spline modeling, which is essentially using splines and then just building geometry based off of that. So we're going to go click on this to create our spline, and essentially for this, and kind of why I chose to use spline modeling, just to give you some insight, because there are a lot of different ways you could choose to model this. Essentially I chose spline modeling just because the limbs here, as you can see, are pretty straight and uniform, and uniform in terms of thickness throughout, and there's a pretty sharp bend. And so I just thought, spline modeling might be an interesting way to apply making those forms and shapes. And so what we're going to do is actually just use our spline and trace each of these limbs kind of as such. And you just want to hit escape after each spline so that you can actually start the new one. Hit escape twice, sorry. And then you can just kind of model the limbs as such. And so when we kind of have everything traced, then we want to, again, apply a sweep to this to actually give it some body and give it some shape. So again, following our, we can go back into our original view and following our same formula of going and making a sweep, putting the spline as the child of the sweep, and then adding a circle in between. And then again, bringing the radius down quite a bit. That's how we can get the limbs to look as such. And so you can even up the radius just to give it the look that you're going for. And so essentially at this point, we can just really apply that to each of the limbs as pictured. And if you even wanted to go in and manipulate the geometry a bit more, what you can do is to right click this, and then you can just hit make editable, and then that'll actually transform it into like a polygon object. And then from there you can, you know, repeat the same tools that we used, from the ring cut to the loop selection and all these different things, to actually just edit it accordingly. So just to show you what that looks like, we can add a few cuts here using ML for loop cut. We can hit UL to actually select those cuts and kind of, you know, drag them however we might want them, and just get it to look how we might want to play with it. And so if you repeat this process for all the limbs, you're going to get something that looks kind of like this. And so for this, it is essentially, I just applied a subdivision surface to each of these sweeps, as you can kind of see here. So to do that, you just basically want to, you know, use this tool here, and then that'll kind of smooth out all the edges and all the polygons, and it'll just give it this very smooth look overall. And so one of the last things that I wanted to show you for this specific project was how to use a different, very useful tool of deformers within Cinema. And so we're actually going to use deformers for the face specifically. So for the face and for the deformers, you can kind of see here that I already utilized it for this ear detail here. But we also will be using that same exact technique for the eyebrows. And so we can start off with just making some of the basic face features, like the eyes and the nose, for example. So for that, we just want to go in here and add a capsule. And the reason that I'm adding a capsule as opposed to something like a sphere or a cylinder or something like that is just because of the general look that the capsule provides. Just because it's, you know, rounded on the edges, it makes it a bit easier to get that look that I'm going for. And so we just want to kind of arrange it accordingly, using R for rotate, T for scale, and then just moving it in space like that. And then when we have the nose, you know, we have it kind of positioned. I feel pretty good about that. We can actually just duplicate that very easily to make the eyes. And so to do that, we just want to hold Control while dragging one of these axes, and it'll actually make a duplicate very easily like that. And so we can just kind of rotate this accordingly using R, scale it down using T. Maybe we want to make it a bit shorter. And just kind of play with it like that to get the overall, you know, to place it how we would like it. Again, to make the other eye, just holding Control while dragging, and that makes it really easy to duplicate it. And so now that we kind of have those features of the face, we want to make the eyebrows and we want to make the mouth, which both, again, utilize the deformers. And so for that, just to show you how it is starting from scratch, we can throw in a capsule again, and then we can just kind of scale it down, and we want the mouth to be kind of skinny. So we're just going to do that. We can even move it closer to the face, which is where it's going to be placed ultimately. And just kind of scaling it down like that. And then when we have it maybe like proportionate to the rest of the face, we can go in and add a bend deformer. So that's just this right here. And so we can either just throw it in like that and then, you know, make it a child, or what is a bit easier is just holding Shift while selecting the bend tool, and that actually will apply it automatically as a child of that parent. And so from here we can actually manipulate the bend to make it actually bend the geometry of our capsule. And so to do that, we just want to play with the strength here. We can up it like that, and then at this point, you know, rotating it a bit, we pretty much have something that looks like a mouth. And so you might notice that it looks a little chunky here just because of the geometry as you can see it. So in order to fix that and make it much of a smoother curve, we just want to up the height segments here in the capsule itself. And then you get much more of a smoother curve because there's a lot more geometry to bend there. So that's essentially the process that I used for the face, including the mouth, the eyebrows, and even the ear details, as you can see here. And yeah, I think in summary, those techniques of, using the loop cut and the loop selection tool, as well as using the spline modeling and even using deformers for primitive objects, those tools in and of itself, I think, allow you to achieve a lot of different looks and results within cinema. And so that's kind of why I wanted to include these things, just because they're very, very infinitely useful, and it's something that helped me take my work that was not so great before to a much more elevated and professional looking level. And so just to kind of reiterate everything from this presentation, and one of the main takeaways out of this whole process is to really just let your interests and your strengths guide what you're learning and how you're learning it. So I get asked all the time from friends or peers or even students about what kind of skills should I learn, or how should I learn these skills, or should I learn these skills because so and so said I should, and I just always would recommend letting what's intrinsically interesting to you just guide that learning trajectory, right? Because having that type of intrinsic motivation is always going to be a better approach, as opposed to being motivated by all of these external factors. It's going to be a much more sustainable and enjoyable process in the long run. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. I really hope that you were able to learn a thing or two about learning 3D, learning cinema, and just learning new skills in general. If you had any questions about anything mentioned, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find my contact info through my website here. And if you want any of those learning resources that I mentioned, from the spreadsheet to the Kanban board, anything like that to duplicate and replicate for yourself, you can find all those resources listed on my blog here. I have everything available for download. So again, thank you so much, and thanks to Maxon for having me.